This is part 3 of our major theories lecture. We're going to cover a couple more theorists in this video. The first is Vygotsky. His theory was sociocultural theory. So let's start with a quote. "What a child can do today with assistance, she will be able to do by herself tomorrow." This kind of sums up his theory. So a little bit of history. Lev Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist. He was contemporary with Piaget, which means he lived at the same time, but he was not as well known until much later. He developed his theory in the 20s and 30s. His sources have later dates, however, because that's when they were translated from Russian and became more popular, especially in the United States. He was interested in language, attention, and memory, and that's what he studied. I think the best way to talk about his theory is to contrast it to Piaget's theory. So, unlike Piaget, who said that development precedes learning, Vygotsky said that social learning precedes development. No single principle, such as Piaget's equilibrium, can account for development. Development cannot be understood without looking at the social and cultural context. So that's why it's a socio-cultural theory. To him, it was all about social context and cultural context. Another big difference was that Piaget's theory was stages, where Vygotsky saw development more as continuous. So the consideration of culture is a huge difference. Vygotsky assumed that cognitive development varies across cultures, whereas Piaget stated that cognitive development is mostly universal across cultures, which means it happens the same way no matter where you are. For Vygotsky, the environment in which children grow up will influence how they think and what they think about. Vygotsky said that development is not universal. Rather, children develop the skills that are demanded by the needs and values of their cultures. And since each culture has different needs and values, each child will develop differently depending on where they grow up. Okay, social factors. Vygotsky stated that cognitive development stems from social interactions, from guided learning, which means that someone teaches the child and guides them through it. And the child and that teacher work together to co-construct knowledge. In contrast, Piaget maintains that cognitive development stems largely from independent explorations in which children construct knowledge of their own. So Piaget thought that children kind of lived in a bubble and they work on their own development. If left alone, they will do things all by themselves and they'll learn on their own. Vygotsky said that it depends on the social environment. Children need to be guided by someone else. Okay, the use of language. According to Piaget, language depends on thought for development. So thought comes before language. For Vygotsky, however, thought and language are separate systems from the beginning of life, and they merge at around age 3, and that produces verbal thought, or what we call inner speech. For Vygotsky, cognitive development results from the internalization of language. So in his theory, language comes first, followed by thought. He believed that language is man's greatest tool. They also saw the role of adults differently. Adults transmit their culture's tools of intellectual adaptation that children internalize, according to Vygotsky. So adults have to give the children the tools they need to survive in that culture. For Piaget, he emphasized the importance of peers over adults, as he believed peer interaction promoted social perspective taking. So Piaget valued peers a little bit more, Vygotsky valued adults more. So in many ways, Vygotsky's theory is the polar opposite of Piaget's. Yet we teach both in child development, but they can't both be right, can they? So I like this image that kind of shows you what I think about these two theories. Yes, they seem opposite, but I think they both capture a little bit of the truth. So we're going to cover both. These are two of my favorite theorists. So let's get into Vygotsky's theories. He believed that we have something called the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. The ZPD refers to the zone between a task being too easy, meaning you have full mastery over it, to a task being too difficult. So you would experience frustration if you tried to do it. He believed that kids have to be guided in their ZPD, and that's how they learn the best. He also thought that that ZPD was best entered through play. You see kids enter that range more easily when they're playing, especially when they're doing pretend play, rather than just having a teacher stand at the front of the classroom and lecture at them. So he believed play was important to get children into their ZPD. Another important factor is the more knowledgeable other. This is the more skilled partner who guides and teaches and encourages the child. So this could be a teacher or a parent or an older sibling. In fact, the best effects are seen when the teacher is only slightly more skilled than the student, such as a slightly older student. So think about how younger siblings learn better from their older siblings rather than their parents. And that kind of shows this. The student internalizes the problem-solving techniques of the teacher, and it gives the student skills to draw on independently later. So the process of guiding the less skilled partner by the more skilled partner is called scaffolding. So the key word here is guiding, not doing for. A scaffold is a structure that people can stand on to build a building, and then when the building's done, they take it away. That's where this term comes from. So when you're scaffolding, you're building a structure from which the child can work, and then as the child gains competence, you slowly take that structure away. So example, a young girl is given her first jigsaw puzzle. Alone, she performs poorly in attempting to solve the puzzle. She just is randomly trying pieces, nothing is fitting. The father then sits with her and describes or demonstrates some basic strategies, maybe finding all the edge pieces or finding a bunch of pieces of the same color and how to rotate them and try to put them together. Maybe he provides a couple of pieces for her to put together herself and then offers encouragement to her when she does it. As the child becomes more competent, the father allows the child to work more independently until slowly the child can do the puzzle all by themselves. According to Vygotsky, this type of social interaction involving cooperative or collaborative dialogue is what promotes cognitive development. So here we have a diagram of the ZPD. So on the y-axis we have the level of challenge, how hard a task is. On the x-axis we have your level of competence, how good you are at that task. So if you're really good but the challenge is low, then you're bored. If you're not very good but the challenge is high, then you're anxious, you can't do it. This zone in between boredom and anxiety is the zone of proximal development. So down here is what the learner can currently achieve independently. This is what they can do all by themselves. Up here, this is what they will be able to do eventually. Inside the zone is what they can achieve with help from that more knowledgeable other. So this is scaffolding. Scaffolding helps the child get from here to here. So you can see they can perform at higher levels with the help of scaffolding and the more knowledgeable other. So some critiques of Vygotsky. He didn't have a lot of specific hypotheses. In order to test something, you have to have a hypothesis. So in this way, his theory is not very scientific. You can't test it. He also does not explain how development actually occurs. He doesn't talk about the inner workings of the brain, for instance. So if you remember our 3 goals of developmental psychology, describe, explain, and optimize, he focused more on describing and optimizing. He didn't focus so much on the explaining. He also does not recognize the individual. The theory doesn't recognize that individuals can rise above their social norms based on their ability. So this might include like a gifted student or a child prodigy. He made no account for these students who can come above their culture and come above the social expectations. Now, a note is that Vygotsky died young. He was in his 30s, so he didn't get the time to fully flesh out his theory. Tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand, Confucius. I believe that that quote really sums up Vygotsky. The next theorist is Montessori and her education principles. Here's a quote from her. Never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed. So in this way, she's kind of like Vygotsky. So a little bit of history of her. Maria Montessori was an Italian teacher and physician. She graduated from medical school in 1896. Just imagine how rare it was at that time for a woman to be educated, much less a physician. This will tell you what kind of woman she was. She worked with mentally disabled children who were usually shipped off to asylums. In 1902, she went back to university for philosophy. At that time, that included much of what we consider psychology today. There, she conducted observations and research at elementary schools. And she applied science to learn which teaching methods worked the best in those elementary schools. So that means she applied the scientific method to the problem. And she opened the first Montessori school in 1907. You've probably all heard of Montessori schools. She designed materials and environments that fostered learning. She had the radical idea that children should have tools and furniture in their own scale. Before this point, children were just expected to use everything that was adult size. She believed that children should have smaller chairs and tables. They should have the same tools as adults, but in a size they could easily use. And that they should have an environment that is completely accessible to them. Everything should be within their reach. And she used these to form what we call the Montessori method, and it has several guiding principles. The first is respect for the child. Instead of adults being the source of authority and discipline, children should be given choices and the freedom to learn. They should be treated with respect. We should treat children as individuals with individual thoughts and feelings, interests, and ideas. Second principle is the absorbent mind. Children are curiosity driven, and they do that better by learning through their own curiosity than they do with learning imparted from above. This is the same as the discovery-based learning in Piaget's theory. So her method is all about discovery-based learning. Children are born ready to learn. Just let them do it. They'll do it on their own. She believed there were sensitive periods. Children are ripe to learn different concepts at different periods of development, but this can vary from one child to the other. So one of the goals of a teacher is to be aware of when a child enters a sensitive period and then give them the material they need to learn. The prepared environment. Classrooms should be filled with readily available and organized learning materials. An environment should be pleasing and only filled with things the teacher wants the students to experience. If it shouldn't be in the child's hands, it's not in the classroom. Auto-education. Children should be able to teach themselves, which can occur once a teacher has provided an appropriate environment and learning materials. Children of different ages and abilities can mix and they can learn from each other. So in the Montessori classroom, teachers aren't the dictator. They're not standing at the top of the class giving the children a lecture. Instead, the teacher is there to be a facilitator and an aide. She is there to organize the environment and provide the materials the children need to learn, but mostly staying out of their way and only guiding them when necessary. So here's some Montessori classrooms. You can see everything is low, it's child size, it's in the child's reach. It's very neatly organized. Here's another one, big open areas. There's tables for art or crafts. You notice there's no rows of desks facing a teacher. These are both Montessori classrooms. So some critiques of Montessori. Her method lacked consideration for social emotional development. It focuses only on cognitive. Some people feel it stifles creativity. There's too much time spent on learning practical skills, and the toys and tools in Montessori classrooms usually only allow for a single right solution and don't really let kids express themselves. There also is too much freedom in the Montessori classroom. If children are free to choose their own activities, how can we make sure they gain all of the skills they need? If you give them a complete choice, some children would spend all day at the art tables and never learn about math or science. Montessori schools are also not backed by research. There's no research that shows that a Montessori method is superior or inferior to other methods. There's just too many variables. We can't isolate it and figure it out. And then her theory was designed for young children only. So she never got around to designing schools or curriculum for older children. She envisioned communities in which they learned by doing real-world tasks such as growing food or building houses. But she never got around to applying her method to older children. So there are Montessori middle and high schools, but they are extrapolated from her ideas on early childhood education. They didn't come directly from her. Okay, so here's another quest for you. Find a Montessori school. It does not have to be local. Explain how the school's philosophies and or practices follow Maria Montessori's theory or don't. You can usually find this information on a school website. All right. We should be able to finish up with this lecture in the next video.